Welcome to Impact Makers Radio, helping you to find jargon-free information before choosing a professional to help solve your problems and live the life you love. And here's your host, Stuart Andrew Alexander.
Hi, and welcome everybody to another Let's Talk Divorce conversation. And on this segment of the show, ladies and gentlemen, I am very pleased to say that we finally have Divorce Mediator Linder, who is the owner of Affordable Mediation, and she's calling in all the way from Phoenix, Arizona. Now, Mara, who is considered to be somewhat of an authority in the divorce industry, will be talking to you today about using a positive psychology approach in divorce mediation. Now, that sounds like a very interesting topic. So, if you are one of the increasing number of people in the Phoenix, Arizona area who find themselves either considering divorce, or maybe you're already going through the process of divorce, or you might even know someone else who's going through divorce. I mean, in reality, who doesn't know anybody going through divorce these days? If that's the case, you just might want to, down tools, stop what you're doing, maybe even grab yourself a notepad and pen and get ready to take some notes as we listen in to what Mara has to share with us today. So with that said, let's not keep her waiting any longer. Welcome to the show, Mara.
Hi, Stuart. Thanks so much for interviewing me and having me on the show.
You are so welcome, my dear. I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us. But before we get started, Mara, it goes without saying that anything that you share with us from this point on today is not legal advice or any kind of legal assistance. It's purely just for the purpose of sharing information. Now, would you just expand on that, just so that we know what you're doing today is not for any form of legal advice or legal assistance?
Absolutely. I am a licensed attorney. However, I do not practice law anymore. I work exclusively as a mediator, and therefore I cannot provide legal advice in any way, shape, or form. I cannot advise people from the standpoint of being their attorney. I don't represent anybody. I work only as a mediator, and therefore am limited in only providing general legal information and no legal advice.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks for sharing that with us then, Mara. So please tell us a little bit about Affordable Mediation, the people who you serve, and the kinds of situations that they usually find themselves in when they reach out to you for your help.
Yeah, Affordable Mediation is exclusively a mediation company focusing primarily on divorce mediation. We don't do any other types of, like I said, practicing law. It's all about mediation. We're a little bit different than a lot of the other mediation companies out here in Arizona in that we have requirements where couples cannot bring their attorneys into the actual mediation process. They cannot bring them into the sessions. And also, we do have the couples meet with me or our other mediator together in a room. We are not in separate rooms going back and forth. So it's a little bit different approach. And as a result, the types of couples that typically seek us out and that use our services are those that are wanting to move forward in a more collaborative way, that don't want to get the traditional two lawyers and duke it out in court and go down the litigation path and through all of that stress. So it is a little bit unique, niche and a unique type of client that we get. Although I do put it out there that almost any couple can consider the process because it's a very powerful process.
So let me just establish one thing to make it absolutely clear then, Mara. Do you work more with individuals or couples? Because I just heard you mentioning couples quite a few times there. Could you just clarify that for our listeners, please?
Yeah, since the focus is primarily on couples that are considering the heartbreaking process of moving forward with either a divorce or a separation, it is about helping them work out their own arrangements, their own agreements on how to move forward through the process. So it is always the couple that's meeting with the mediator and trying to see how everybody can move forward.
Fantastic. So what would you say are some of the advantages of using mediation in the divorce process, Mara?
So I think there's just numerous advantages. I could go on literally all day about the advantages of mediation versus the other way, which is the old traditional go to court with the two lawyers. It's a much more positive and healthy way to move forward. There's minimal involvement with the court. Usually it's just a couple filings. That's it. You do not have to go to hearings. You don't have to have testimony, any of that. The couple remains in 100% in full control of all the decisions on everything that they have to decide. It's their assets, their debts, their kids, their fur babies, what their goals are, how they want to be financially secure going forward. The couple makes all those decisions. There's not attorneys and judges that are stepping in and deciding for them. It ends up resulting in better co-parenting relationships, a lot less stress on the couple, and if they have kids, it's significantly less time consuming and extremely less expensive than the traditional route. So we really approach the mediation process, which in and of itself, I think, is a fabulous and healthier process for most couples anyway. We approach it in more of a positive psychology approach, where taking it completely out of the litigation arena, taking it out of what the lawyers would say. And I honestly just tell couples up front, I don't even want to hear, if you have lawyers, and you don't have to have lawyers, but I don't even want to hear what your lawyers want to do, what their litigation strategy is, what they're telling you to do. Talk to me about you. Talk to me about what it is that you want. What are your hopes and concerns, and what are you confused about? What would you like to see happen in this process? And let's just be real.
Okay, so when it comes to using a positive psychology approach in divorce mediation, what do you feel are some of the biggest myths out there then, Myra?
So most people think that if they don't hire two lawyers and fight it out in court, they're not going to get a fair divorce settlement. Or they might already want to use mediation, but think they have to have attorneys and they have to be in two separate rooms and they can't talk to each other, and that the attorneys have to basically lead the process. So that's kind of some of the misconceptions, some of the myths out there about using mediation, or whether even to use mediation, or if they're using mediation, what type of mediation to use. There's a lot of confusion around that and thinking that it's just not going to be fair if we don't have our lawyers doing the talking for us.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the misconceptions surrounding your industry, because both you and I know when one wants to find any kind of information, it's readily available on the internet, through friends, through colleagues, etc. However, that information is not always accurate. So what are some of the typical common misconceptions that you come across on a regular basis about your industry?
Again, there are so many. I mean, a lot of people, first off, don't even know what mediation is, and they're Googling meditation or medication, that type of thing. So the word mediation itself, they're not even sure what it is. So there's, what is mediation? And one of the first things I get is, how can mediation be fair? It's not going to be fair. We don't have lawyers representing us. How is this going to be fair? Another big one I get is those who do know what mediation is, they still are under the misconception the mediator is going to make all decisions for them. Going to tell them, how a big one out here is spousal maintenance, also called alimony in other states. Am I entitled to it, and what is that going to be? And they assume the mediators would be like, here it is, and that's actually not, in fact, how it works at all.
So, Myra, please share with our listeners, what are some of your clients' most common fears about using a positive psychology approach in divorce mediation? Please go ahead.
So one thing that comes across a lot is clients are concerned that their soon-to-be ex doesn't care about them and doesn't want to see them be okay, that they're just more concerned about getting everything they can possibly get and get the better divorce settlement and get all the assets and get the most time with the kids and all of that, and that they're going to be left out of the process and left on the shorter end of the stick. And along with that, another huge fear is that they're going to be left financially destitute, that one person, again, is going to walk away with the bulk of the community assets and the finances and the security, and the other one's going to be just left out on the street. And I've actually had clients express that exact fear. I'm going to be left out on the street.
Mm-hmm. So what can they do then to get past those fears, Mara?
So this is exactly where I think the positive psychology approach works. And I'm borrowing from one of what I call the founders of mediation. Not everyone's heard of him and not everyone thinks he is the founder of mediation, but it's my personal belief, a psychologist called Carl Rogers, who was the pioneer of the client-centered, was also called person-centered, or Rogerian therapy. And what it really is about letting people be honest and open, but in a supportive, caring environment that's non-judgmental, and helping them come to their own solutions, reach their own health, so to speak. And so that's one of the ways I help my clients overcome fears. I use that approach. In fact, I start all my sessions with just having them tell me where they are in that moment. How are you feeling? What are you concerned about? What are you feeling like is your most immediate concern? talk to me about, at this moment in time, what are you thinking? And remember, they're together in the same room. So the other person the person they've been married to and they may have had kids with or dogs or other pets with is sitting there listening to that. And I have them just be very, very real. And I try to provide the most supportive, compassionate, non-judgmental environment. And I have them each do that in their own perspective, in their own words. And it's really amazing to see the response of the other person. A lot of times they're surprised. Oh, I didn't realize you felt that way. They also tend to provide reassurance. I don't want you to feel bad or be worried about finances. I want to make sure you're okay. I appreciate what you did in our marriage and who you are, and I still care for you, and you're a great mother or a great father. All of this comes out when we just use this positive psychology approach and really just let people get back to the basics and just be honest about what they're really thinking and feeling. And it is extremely powerful. And you just see, like, people take deep breaths or the tension leave the room, and then we can be really productive in talking about, okay, how do we make the best out of a very difficult situation? How can everybody move forward in the most positive way, given it is what it is, a divorce scenario? The other part of that, the big fear that I also mentioned, was around finances. Very interestingly, even in this day and age, most couples have one person who is the financially savvy one in the marriage. The other person typically has other roles in the marriage, very normal, but they often don't know anything about the account, about the monthly budget. Most couples, in fact, don't even budget still in this day. And they then have a lot of fear around, okay, now since, particularly the lower income earner, now since I am the lower income earner, or maybe they're a stay-at-home parent, what am I going to do financially? How am I going to make it? And so there's a lot of fear that's brought up around that. So one of the things we do is we educate both of them, particularly the one who isn't as savvy financially, on what are the family finances? What have you traditionally been spending in on what? And we break it down to everything from haircuts and the gas expenses and kids' school lunches, things like that, and do a budget and work that out. And then we pull all the family finances together in a spreadsheet as well on what kind of bank accounts you have, what type of retirement accounts you have, what kind of credit card bills, what are current balances, and get everybody on the same page of here's the financial picture. Now, once we're all understanding what the financial picture is, what do we do with that? How do we go from one household to two with this financial picture so that we can meet everybody's needs? And that's usually where the biggest challenge is, because it's difficult. You're using the same pie, now you're trying to add more pieces to it. Right. And it's very challenging to do that. Most people work it out, but we need to have that educational piece on getting everybody on even footing and level ground on understanding the family finances.
Let's just talk a little bit about what I like to call the invisible voices. So in other words, the children who get involved in these divorce cases. Now, you're a divorce mediator, so I assume when most of the couples who come to you for your help, they're at the point where they're actually ready to speak with each other and to find an amicable solution. However, let's just speak to those couples who may be listening and for whatever reason, they're not in a place right now where they're ready to mediate, where they're ready to be amicable, where they're ready to speak with each other, and they may be at loggerheads with each other, and for whatever reasons there might be for that contention. However, the fact is they have children. Children are involved. The children are caught in the middle. Now, this is something that lies really dear to my own heart, being a child of divorce myself, and it's the very reason for me starting this particular series called Let's Talk Divorce, because as a child of 8-9 years old, I experienced a very volatile divorce between my parents. There was lots of fighting, there was lots of conflict, there was lots of blood, and this happened before my very own eyes. And as a child, I didn't have the tools or the resources, the knowledge to be able to decipher all of that. And I ended up putting the blame and the guilt of my parents' breakup on my own shoulders. I'm sure that's something that you come across on a regular basis. And I carried that guilt throughout my childhood, throughout my teenage years, throughout my young adult years. And it took me up until my mid-30s. I'm 55. I'm 55, making myself young. I'm 56 now as we're speaking. But it took me right up until my mid-30s to develop the tools and the process to be able to deal with the fallout of that negative experience of being a child of divorce, of being caught in the middle, of having my parents play this ping pong game between, my mother used to say, your father's this, your father's that, and vice versa. And I didn't know which way to turn as a child. All I knew is I loved my mother, I loved my father equally, but they, for whatever reason, just couldn't get on with each other. And that had a massive impact on me, had a massive impact on my work in school, on my exams, and my self-confidence, my self-esteem, my self-belief, and what I thought of myself, and the choices I made as a young man, the professions I went in. The domino effect of that was massive. So going back to where I started with my question, what would you say to any individual or any couple right now who are out there, they're listening in, and they are in that situation where, for whatever reason, they absolutely just cannot stand the sight of each other, they can't stand just to even hear their partner's name, or whatever the case may be, but there are children involved. What would you say to those couples right now? What's the most important thing for them to know?
Absolutely. And you're right. Obviously, in a process like this, the kids are a factor, and depending on how the couple handles it is going to have a direct impact on how the kids fare through the process, not just immediately, but long into the future, no question. So exactly what you're saying is if couples can step aside from the emotions, and that's very difficult when you're in the middle of the emotions. It's very hard to see the forest through the trees, especially when there's a lot of anger or resentment or frustration, which I still think is coming up from a lot of also fear. It's hard to step away from that and look at what's really important here. And I do think, though, most parents do have that innate natural instinct to protect their kids. And I think especially with more education around divorce and kids of divorce, I think most couples do somewhere, even sometimes it's at the back of their mind during that emotional process, that we really don't want the kids to suffer during that. So it may be hard to see that in the moment, but I think that most parents do have that in them. And so now, knowing that there is another alternative that's going to be less stressful and more gentle on the kids, I think just knowing that is going to sort of trigger that. And they may not be immediately ready. If emotions are really, really raw, a lot of times I tell people, come back in a couple of weeks, but some people still want to get moving forward. But I feel like that now that there is an option, they know there's an option that can keep the kids out of that type of process, and yet still putting their interests at the forefront, because everything we talk about in mediation is not just what's going to work for the parents, but what's in the best interest of your kids. And I truly believe, and there's exceptions to this, but I truly believe that most parents are better judges of what's in the best interest of their children than an attorney who doesn't know their kids, or a judge who might meet their kids, if at all, for a 4-hour trial. So I defer a lot to the couples I work with on, tell me about your kids, what's really best for them. And generally, most of the time, they know that. I also want to kind of say I'm rather not, I want to say in awe, I'm for lack of a better word, of the couples that are choosing mediation, because I think they don't get enough credit. That I think attorneys, a lot of attorneys, not every attorney, I think a lot of attorneys just assume they know what's better for the family than the family and the couples themselves. The couples I work with, really the parenting isn't the big issue. They tend to be very good co-parents. They end up being better co-parents after a divorce in a lot of cases, because a lot of the marital issues are now out of the picture. We have a lot of blended families that end up, doing great with even introducing new spouses and new kids into the picture, because they used a collaborative mediation process in the divorce. And the fact that couples are seeking mediation now, are even asking what it is, and then those that are choosing it, tells me that they do know that they're going to be co-parents for life. Once you have kids, I tell everyone, getting divorced or not, once you have kids, you're a co-parent for life. And they know that that's something that needs to be considered in moving forward, even if the immediate emotions are sort of clouding the picture. The other thing I explain is it's the mediator's job to manage the emotion. You may not have, as a couple, effective communication at this point for all the various reasons that can break down a marriage. But when you introduce a third party who's objective, who is not invested in the outcome, and can manage the emotions, the discussions, you can have a much more productive conversation. And we do. I see it with every single couple. And so that's led me to believe over the years that it's not the couples that are breaking down the process in a divorce and that are having all these issues. Yes, they're full of emotion. It's the process. Our traditional litigation process is designed to be win-lose. We all know that. Each side is going to have an attorney. The attorney is going to argue the best possible situation for that person, and the other side is going to do the exact opposite. So obviously that's not collaborative. So really, when you take a process and give people just that, again, I go back to the positive psychology, the client-centered process, a forum where they can be heard, acknowledged, understood, and somebody managing the discussion so they're productive and don't, deteriorate down to more of an emotional confrontation, things happen, and in a very positive way. And the vast majority of couples that I work with are concerned about their kids. They don't want them to have that traditional experience of what happens in a very antagonistic divorce and years of litigation and all of that. They want the kids to be as unscathed as possible through the process. And actually, a lot of kids adjust very well when their parents are modeling good communication and collaborative. And I mean, not to say there aren't bumps along the way. We're all human. We all, sometimes speak quickly before we think. We all do it. But really, it's a very different process when the couple chooses to try their best to work through this so that they can separate in a way and still remain. I'm going to borrow Gwen Stefani's saying and Gavin Rossdale, which I love, to remain committed as partners in parenthood, even if they're no longer partners in marriage. So I really do see a lot of that. And I think just anyone out there considering mediation, it's worth just a little inquiry and seeing if that will help support remaining together as a family in that manner.
So, Mara, I've known people in the past, friends, even family members, who have gone down the traditional litigation route while getting divorced, and they've ended up spending a small fortune. In one case, one of my friends actually lost their house, the foreclosure on their house, because they simply just went to war with each other. The funny thing was, one party wanted to mediate, was open to mediating, but the other party wasn't open. They went down the traditional route, believing that would be the best thing. And like you said, the traditional system is set up for win-lose, and that's exactly what happened. On paper, one party thought they'd won, but nobody won in the end because the kids suffered from the whole process. They lost the house, they almost had to claim bankruptcy. So with that in mind, and for those people who are out there thinking, maybe litigation is the only option, what are some of the perceived obstacles that you see that might be preventing people from seeking the help of a divorce mediator like yourself then, Mara?
That's exactly it. And I do get that question a lot, because I may have one person call in saying, I'm very interested. I've read up a lot of mediation, but my spouse, I don't even know how to talk to them about it. Mm-hmm. I don't think they want to. I think they just want to get the lawyer, or they may have already gotten a lawyer. So how can we do this if only one of us is interested in moving forward?
Right.
And so what I tell them is, either have your spouse call me, because I always answer the phone. I answer my own phones, and I'm happy to talk to anyone. Or here's some tips on talking to them about potentially using mediation. So first off, I always have everyone try to understand that there's no risk. Absolutely no risk of mediation. It's completely confidential. There is nothing binding. If you try a mediation session and it doesn't feel like the right process, or you feel like it's not going to be fair, or it's just not a right fit with the mediator, whatever that may be, there's no further commitment and nothing has been lost. You always have the right at any point to get a lawyer and take it through the court. At any point, until the very end of a mediation process, if the mediator is drafting up your docs, or lawyers might be drafting up your docs, however, once you've signed your final docs, submitted them to the court, then it's binding. Up until that point, you can always take it through the litigation process. So there's literally no downside in trying a mediation session first. I tell people, if you want to use it just as a question answer, just gather more information. What's wrong with getting more informed and getting more information? And just use it for that and make a decision later. Why not? So I always let people know that, especially with my company, everything is pay as you go. So there's no commitment. There's no upfront deposit or retainer or anything like that. So there's no risk in trying one mediation session. So I say that's one thing, make sure you understand and explain to your spouse, or I'll explain to them, that there's no risk whatsoever and there's nothing binding. It also doesn't mean that you want a divorce. A lot of people say, my spouse doesn't want to get divorced. They're afraid if they come to mediation, it's basically saying, yes, I want a divorce too. No, almost all the clients that come to see me, one's much further along in that process than the other. One's more ready to say, you know what, this just isn't going to work, and I want to move forward with the divorce process. And the other one's like, no, I'm not there yet. That's most of my couples. By attending a mediation session, you're not saying, yes, we both agree to move forward with the divorce. You're just, again, exploring options, seeing you're getting a better, clearer picture on what the other person where they're really at. Are they really intent on moving forward with the divorce? I'll have situations where even though one person initiated it and called and they come in for the session, they really aren't quite sure that's what they want. And they'll say that in session. And we might talk about counseling options. Or I had one couple decide to take a long needed vacation together the next weekend. And we actually spent the mediation session planning where they were going to go and what they were going to do and who would watch the kid and all of that. And they went and kind of tried to rekindle things. I have a lot of reconciliations during the mediation process. So the thing to know and to tell your spouse is, would you be willing to try? And I'm using that phrase specifically. Would you be willing to try a mediation session after I've explained all this? There's been some research that I've seen in some of the conflict resolution journals that says that's basically the magic phrase. If you ask somebody, would you be willing to try something? There tends to be overwhelmingly a positive response to that phrase. You're inquiring, you're asking, you're not demanding, you're not telling. And there's, again, when you know there's no downside to it, that tends to be a very effective way to talk to your spouse. And that's kind of how I advise people.
And some really great advice as well. And I must iterate again, it's not legal advice, it's just advice based on your own experiences. And with that said then, Mara, what about those people who, they find themselves in that position where they're looking at divorce, and again, the same kind of scenario, one person is open to mediation and the other person is more set on going down the litigation route, and they look towards family and friends for insights, for advice, and the family and friends are the ones encouraging them to, go on, get as much as you can out of him or her, go for it and take him to court or take her to court or whatever the case may be. If that's you and your surroundings, your immediate circle of influence around you are actually encouraging you to go down that route, that confrontational route, and there are children involved again, what kind of insights would you like to share with that person who finds himself in that situation? Because from my perspective, and obviously I'm not an expert, but that can't be healthy. What do you say then, Mara?
Well, that's one of the most normal scenarios. In fact, we all, and rightfully look to our friends and family for support when we're going through any kind of challenging time. So a lot of times the advice is well-meaning. Somebody went through their own divorce, or they know somebody who went through something, or they knew somebody's sister whose brother whose niece went through something. And it's always well-meaning advice. And those are the people that we all look to first. And I address that, right on in my sessions. If you're getting a lot of input from a lot of other people, that's great. But try to refocus on you. What are your specific personal concerns and goals for you and for your kids if you have kids? Let's get back to that, because everybody has well-meaning advice, but their situation is different. And what I always say is none of us are going to live with the decisions ultimately that you guys make, that the couple makes or that the individual makes. We're not the ones that are going to ultimately live with it. So we can all give all the advice in the world, and I can make suggestions as well as the mediator, but I always remind everyone, you're going to live with this. So let's refocus on what you want. You can sort through all the well-meaning advice to the best you can, but always remember at the end of the day, they're not going to live with the ultimate decisions, consequences, agreements. You and your kids are. So when you can refocus, again, using that positive psychology approach on what do you really feel in your heart and your gut and your mind that makes sense for you and your family, let's focus on that. And by all means, go ahead and get other advice. Even if you want to get legal advice, and I, again, always temper everyone with take your legal advice with the lens that the attorney is doing the best they can just for you, not for the whole family, just for you from your perspective. So yes, get that legal advice, but keep at the back of your mind that this is, skewed in one direction, and that your spouse is likely getting the exact opposite advice. So that's kind of where I try to refocus everyone is back on, let's get down to you, to your life, your kids, your specific personal situation.
Mara, I'm sat here grinning like a Cheshire cat, as we say in the UK, because the information that you're sharing with us today is so good, and I mean really so good, that I'm considering filing for divorce just so that I can be your client. How does that sound?
No. We're not encouraging divorce.
Yeah, but seriously,
those who made the decision.
We really appreciate these great insights that you've been sharing with us so far, Mara. Could you just Yeah, go ahead and share an example of how you've actually been able to help somebody succeed in getting the transformation that they were looking for when they initially reached out to you. Please share an example for us, please.
So I don't follow up with a lot of my clients by request, meaning it's a very personal process. People don't want to talk about their divorce process when they're done, most people at least. But fortunately, a lot of my clients do give me some positive feedback and let me know what happened. Some just will shoot me a quick email. I thank you so much for making a very challenging process, more human, or whatever it may be. And that's, makes me feel on those days when you're like, am I doing any good? Why am I doing this? Those are the days where it's like, okay, people are appreciating this, and hopefully I'm helping them move forward somewhat in a more positive way. So a couple examples, though, for those who have shared, again, I try not to impose on people's personal private lives, but for some do keep in touch with me. It really has been heartwarming to hear that they tell me, one, we're much better parents. We are great friends now. We parent so well. The kids are thriving. We're still doing family trips together, or we're still always doing the holidays together. That type of feedback, those type of examples, I hear quite often from those that do follow up with me. So that really tells me that I think the process works, and that those that are willing to try a different way of doing things are probably going to reap the most rewards. And I do think there's a lot more awareness now that mediation is actually an alternative, and that people are actually seeking it out much more than they were even 11, 12 years ago when I started doing this. So that really is a positive movement. I kind of have this little term I use. I call it the new divorce, the mediation generation, because I think people are seeking more peace these days, ways to not be in conflict, ways to move forward in their lives more productively and with more contentment. And I think that's kind of what we're all seeking right now in this generation.
As a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, my guest today is divorce mediator MaraINDER, and her topic is using a positive psychology approach in divorce mediation. Now then, Mara, with that in mind, and for those couples who are listening in right now, what are some of the, let's say, rarely discussed pitfalls or even common mistakes that they need to be aware of, no matter what kind of situation that they find themselves in?
So in general, well, we're talking about people going through divorce scenario, things like that, and
Sure,
we touched on a lot of them, which is listening to other people and not following their own heart and things like that. But one of the things I just wanted to raise and I'm not sure if this is direct answering your question, was that in choosing a professional, a divorce professional to assist them, that people be a little careful and do their research and check into the backgrounds of who they're choosing. Interestingly, and this is in most states, I think there's only 2 or 3 states that actually certify mediators. There's no certification process. There's no educational requirement. There's no experience requirement. There's no requirement whatsoever to be a mediator. So out here in Arizona, anybody can call themselves a mediator, literally anybody. And if they say that they're certified, I don't know what they're certified in because there are no certification processes. So I just tell people, when considering all this, there's going to be so much information on the internet. There's going to be so much well-meaning advice from friends and family. There's going to be all kinds of conflicting advice from attorneys. Is really, do your research, check into the credentials of whoever you're considering using to help with the process. If you're looking at a mediator, look at their background, their experience, and their approach. There's a lot of different approaches to mediation. Like I said, I use the positive psychology approach, and there's different ways that other mediators do that. And then also, like I keep saying, check in with yourself. Really go back to what am I trying to do here? How do I want to move forward? What are my immediate concerns? What are my short and long-term goals? How do I want to see my family evolve? And check in with yourself on that, and really center on where you are in the moment and how you want to move forward. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get everybody to at least consider, even before choosing a process. I just created sort of a pre-checklist that I'm going to put on the website soon. That's like, here's things to just consider before you do anything. Before, you don't have to talk to anyone about this. Just look through this, consider it, and just have that talk with yourself.
Looking back on your career then, Mara, When you think about all of those people who you've been able to help to achieve the transformation that they were looking for when they initially reached out to you, because essentially that's what you do. You take people from point A, where they walk into your office and they're in this horrible situation where they're considering divorce, and you take them through to point B, which is the transformation that they're looking for. So when you think back to all of those people who you've been able to help and support, on a deep down personal level, Mara, what does that give you? I mean, how does that make you feel?
I actually feel very humbled that people allow me to be part of this process. And that's what I even tell some of my clients. It's like, thank you for allowing me to be part of this. And you talk about me doing this. I truly believe that it's the couple that's doing this. I believe that I'm just providing the environment for them to do what they naturally are able to do. And again, that comes back to the psychology, and I keep harping on that, but that's so much my approach. And I do my master's in counseling psych. I did work in the counseling field, and I'm just amazed that so much mediation out here is so law-based when I think that's not even part of it at all. I mean, people hire me because I'm a lawyer, and I kind of laugh to myself. I'm like, this is so much about you. It has nothing to do with the law. This is about you guys and your lives. Let's focus on that. And so that's what I do. I'm doing what I think Carl Rogers taught us all to do, which is just give people the right environment, and they're going to figure it out. They know what's best. They're going to rise to the top. They're going to, take the higher road. They're going to put their kids' needs first. But you just have to give them that right environment. I don't think our litigation system gives people that environment. So I'm a little biased and jaded. Been an attorney for 26 years. So I really feel that it's them and not me. I'm just trying to give them that environment to do the hard work themselves, which they're doing. And so that's pretty amazing to be able to witness that from where I'm sitting.
Yeah, I'm quite sure it is. So tell us a little bit about your backstory. And you mentioned already that you're using a positive psychology approach in divorce mediation, but I'm sure that you didn't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to be a divorce mediator. There's always a long winding path to where one finds himself today, right? So tell us a little bit about your backstory. What inspired you or even led you to become a divorce mediator, Mara?
So my long, windy backstory is much too long for the show, but I'll give you the cliff notes version.
Notes, please,
I kind of knew from first semester of law school that I didn't want to be a litigator. I didn't want the fight. That's not my nature. So I ended up, when I graduated law school, I became a transactional regulatory attorney, which stays out of the courts. We basically play with regulations and help people through the maze of laws that can seem confusing. And I really love that. And that field dried up, and I was moved against my will into litigation, and miserable every day, stomach aches. So I did what anybody would do who's unhappy with their career, and I moved to Italy for a year.
Yes, you did,
and,
right?
Basically, contemplated my proverbial navel, and decided that wanted to get back to my initial interest, which was psychology. So I ended up, when I came back to the States, while I still practiced law to, pay the bills and all of that, I went and got my master's in counseling psych. And I did enjoy the counseling field, but due to a series of things where licensure came out at the wrong time, and there's a lot of hiccups in that and all, for a lot of reasons, I decided to teach in the counseling field instead of actually get my license as a therapist. And although I did do counseling during my education program, I did actually work and did do some marriage counseling. I actually decided to teach in the counseling field, which I love. And then while I was teaching counseling and still practicing law on the side, mediation literally fell in my lap. Somebody approached me and said, you have this counseling degree now and this counseling background, and you're a lawyer. Have you considered mediation? And like everybody else, what's mediation? So I tried it, fell madly in love, stopped practicing law, stopped working in the counseling field, and devoted myself 100% to mediation. It's what I've been doing all along. Back when I was a lawyer, I was trying to talk everybody into settlement. I'm like, why are we all fighting? Let's work at this all out. So it turns out that's what I had always wanted to do, but there wasn't really a name for it back then. So it kind of just all evolved, I think, the way that it was supposed to. And now I've been a mediator for 11 years. And really, really, as you think you can tell, I'm pretty passionate about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Mara, what do you think is the most important question people should be asking themselves when they're thinking about using divorce mediation?
Kind of like what I touched on before, what do you really want? Being honest, being really honest. You don't have to tell anyone else. Just ask yourself, what do you really want? What are you trying to do here? And that's really it.
And is there a process that they can use to think that through? Do you have any kind of tips, things they can write down, or, how can you decipher that? Because it's one thing to ask, what do I really want? But if you have a process to kind of figure that out, is there something that you could share with us in that, Mara?
Well, a couple things. One is that checklist I mentioned. I actually spent some time thinking through that, just people may not even know the questions to ask themselves as far as that. But to sort of summarize that right now is really, like I said, a lot of times when you're splitting up, one person is more driving the bus on that than the other. So your wants, the want of the person not driving the bus might be, I want to reconcile, which is fine. I asked that too. I want to know that first session. Do you want to reconcile? Let's talk about that. So there's specific questions. So it's what do you want as far as, and this is one of the first things I ask everyone, do you want to move forward with the divorce process, or do you want to talk about other options? Right there, first question. And then what are your main concerns? And so I always want to use the word fears. That sort of can put people off, but concerns, but it really is your fears. What are those? Really, what are those? What are your goals, short-term and long-term? And then in my checklist, I give examples. Is it to have a good parenting relationship? Is it to have the kids as moving forward as healthy as possible? Is it financial stability? It's usually going to be several of those. Some people have very specific goals. I want to purchase a house in the next 6 months. I want the kids to go to this particular school. I want our child who's doing really well in X, it could be, I have the ballet or baseball or whatever it is, to be able to have the support emotionally and financially from both of us to continue with their dreams. Whatever that may be. And like I said, it's usually more than one thing, but sort of focus on that. But what's immediate and what's more long-term? And thinking about that. What kind of relationship do you want with your spouse when you're going to continue to be parents, if you're going to continue to be parents? If you don't have kids, some people still are sharing the pets. And so they still have that relationship with their soon-to-be ex over the pets. I actually put in provisions that say the other person will take care of the pet when one is away out of town, and vice versa, things like that, because that's still their baby. So that type of thing, all these things to think about as far as what do you really want?
If someone feels they want to know more about using a positive psychology approach in their divorce mediation process, what would be the best way for them to get in touch with you?
I try to make myself very accessible. So probably too accessible. I've had to set little boundaries where, unless it's an emergency, I don't answer the phone on the weekends or try not to respond to emails on the weekends. Hard to do these days.
Right.
But I answer my own phone. People are welcome to call me. And are you putting up the phone number, or should I give that right now?
Yeah, I'll put it up as well, but please give it as well, because not everybody will go to the website. Go ahead.
So it's an Arizona phone number. It's 602-622-2008. And if I'm in session, I won't answer the phone, but I strive to return all calls same business day or next business day at the latest. I think that's really important. People are usually very, concerned or overwhelmed when they give a call. So I want to be there and try to answer those questions for them. I can always be emailed at mara@affordablemediationaz.com. My website has a contact form, www.affordablemediationaz.com. And there's also a lot of information on there. I'm trying to add as much as I can on there to help answer some of the questions like the ones you were asking today. So there's all kinds of ways to reach out and get information. And I'm always happy to talk about the process with anyone. I cannot talk substantively about anyone's particular situation or give legal advice like we talked about before, but I'm very happy to explain the mediation process, my approach, their situation in general, all of that, and hopefully provide some information on options for people and ways to explore their options and get more informed.
Thank you so much again, Lara, for sharing so generously with us today. You have certainly demonstrated that you are a true educator, an advocate, and a trustworthy advisor for your client's success. So thank you.
Well, thank you. I so appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk about something I really believe in and feel strongly about, and hopefully can help people with their process.
You are so welcome, Mara, my friend. And I'd also like to take a moment to say a big thank you to you. Yes, our listener. Without you, we wouldn't have anybody to speak to. We'd be sat here twiddling our little thumbs. So thank you for taking the time out of your busy day and joining us on what I can only describe as a very insightful and informative discussion with one of the top divorce mediators in Phoenix, Arizona today. Again, her name is Mara Linder. Make sure you do check her out. Give her a call. She shared a phone number. Visit her website. There are some great resources on there. She mentioned a checklist, which sounds very useful. Whatever you do decide to do, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure that after listening to Mara today, you're going to be in the very best of hands. So that's it, folks. Again, my name is Stuart Andrew Alexander. I'm a long-lost distant relative of the British royal family, but they don't tell anybody, Mara. Can you believe that?
I can actually, Stuart.
It's unbelievable that they don't tell anybody. But anyway, besides that, we'll be back shortly with some more leading divorce professionals in this, our series of Let's Talk Divorce Conversations. So, until then, take care, have a great day, and we'll talk real soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Impact Makers Radio. To listen to all past, present and future industry thought leaders and trendsetters, visit us at impactmakersradio.com.